Hello everyone, welcome to LEGO Rewind, where we take another look at old retired LEGO themes. 2002 was a crazy time. This is just when things were taking a different turn under new management as LEGO began to plant its feet back in the ground after years of circling the drain. We've established in other episodes what a weird experimental era it was in terms of some of the more outlandish themes, but Normal System was undergoing its own metamorphosis too, and in a pretty subtle way. Despite the many new elements introduced in just the last couple of years, most system sets still had a very rough, geometric feel, with corners and flat panels and sharp angles everywhere. It was the last we'd see of that old school, purely brickish look before LEGO blew us away by rounding things out, literally. Enter curved slopes, wide, bubbling canopies. These got a big push in lines like Star Wars Attack of the Clones, quickly getting people accustomed to LEGO's new facelift. I think this may be the biggest thing that sets 2002 apart from other years. It really felt like a new era for LEGO, a time of change and uncertainty, but also momentum and excitement. It completely changed the way we design ships, cars, submarines, basically everything. And one of the themes to make great use of these revolutionary new pieces was LEGO Racers. LEGO Racers wasn't LEGO's first racing theme, that would be Race. It's hard to say exactly when Race began though. Depending on what counts, one could say it began in 2000, the early 90s, or even sometime in the 80s, as a LEGO Town or LEGO Land sub-theme. But these were barely distinguishable from that clean, friendly, wholesome feel that Town was known for until Race's later years, when it finally started to have a feel of its own, finally going all the way and featuring the Race branding on the packaging for about a year. To my knowledge, these were the first system sets to feature the pullback motors that would be used for many years. A couple of Technic sets had their own pullback motors a few years before, but these were more exposed, nothing like the giant block we're familiar with. Race quickly established itself as its own thing with its builds, colors, and attitude before evolving into the more aggressively named Racers, further setting itself apart from its gentle towny roots. Race 2000 was a transition from LEGO's rather old-fashioned image to the new era. For some, Racers really began with a 1999 game, but the toys themselves were released in 2001, the first Racers being the Zalaxians from the game's sequel. These were different. For $3 you got a go-kart of sorts with a little alien dude with an edgy name like Lighter or Pulse or Rip or Shred with 2 Ds to wood kids over. And their tiny packaging could be inverted to make a ramp or a slammer. That's clever. There were a bunch of these, and the only real set you could say was Freeze and Chill. 114 pieces for $20. Gotta love that price to part ratio, huh? Some think this wave was a complete joke, but I do think they contributed in their own pretty big way to LEGO's changing shape. The hoods and engines and fins made for these tiny cars would later be used in all sorts of larger, more mainstream sets. All those little spots of detail filled out by these unusual 2x2 bricks. Yeah, if you didn't know where those pieces came from, you have these little aliens to thank for that. I guess the drivers could be considered one of these weird new bricks themselves, but really? Behold, the smallest LEGO set in history! Orange, purple, and turquoise. There's a color combination you'll never see again. Or will we? The only other noteworthy set that year was Radio Control Racer, an expensive but pretty versatile RC kit, but even this was just a re-release of a set from 1998, so wait, is that when Racers began? This is getting confusing. But yeah, not a lot to see in 2001. But now we've caught up to 2002. This year of Drome Racers, as they call it just to make things even more complicated, boasted a huge assortment of different things, almost too many to keep track of. First you had a lot of little ones. These were like the Zalaxians, but better, with a driver body that was like theirs, but with a nub for a normal human minifig head to stick on. A smaller driver meant a smaller car, but these had much higher piece counts and more detail, and they didn't feel cheap like the Zalaxians' gimmicky cars made to bump into each other and catapult the driver through the air. Because these were so small, it was super easy to build entire racetracks around them, and they often came in pairs so you could pretend race with a friend. They even had a downsized version of the pullback motors that I remember working really well for how tiny they were. You could squeeze a lot of fun out of these, and I loved them for that. Then you had the bigger ones, driven by normal minifigs with giant motors and all. Trailblazers like Hot Scorcher and Nitro Pulverizer that made great use of the new slopes. They were the first of many such toys to come and have become downright iconic to my generation of LEGO fans. Then you had Technic builds. These typically didn't include minifigs of any sort, they were just a neat car, and a couple of RCs. This year alone included over 25 sets. Racers' early waves were all over the place, but they had something for everybody. 2003 was more of the same, but that's not bad for a theme that already gave builders so many options. There weren't as many sets, but it was a good range. This set only includes a couple of motors, but several builds you could switch out on them. That's a neat idea. Similarly, this one gives you different kinds of engine detailing to swap around. We got some neat Technic bikes, some bigger cars, some more realistic for the time, but nothing could make 2003 stand out like 2002 did. 2004 started to homogenize things. You still had a few smaller cars, but they didn't have drivers anymore. Heck, aside from some real-world cars, all of them were driverless. But I gotta admit, I love these cars. They kinda reminded me of the Tow and Robo Riders, you know? There were 6 of them, they all seemed to have their own weird character, like they were alive. The builds were satisfying. I noticed LEGO really liked to insert the word EXO into every name they could back then. Also Crusher, they really loved that word. There was also a bigger focus on RCs, with various accessory packs sold on the side. But this was the end of the Drome Racers era, giving way to new sub-themes in 2005. The smaller ones became their own beast, Tiny Turbos, a great evolution with much more detailed builds ranging from 40 to 50 pieces for about the same price now that they didn't need to leave room for a minifig. They were a lot like Star Wars Mini that way. The larger ones became Power Racers, and these were the usual mix of pullback motors and slammers. Interestingly, 4 of the previous year's cars were bundled together as Rumble Racers. Jeez, can't they just pick a name already? The rest were a mix of Ferrari builds and RCs that had their own transformation kits, a short-lived idea very reminiscent of Snap. I wouldn't mind seeing accessory kits of just normal bricks or Technic pieces. I love these names. Carbon Star, Fat Tracks, Road Hero, Big Bling Wheelie. The two lines developed in tandem for several years with mixed results. Ferrari always felt like a third wheel to me, but they were nice enough. Tiny Turbos was consistently very good, with a lot of bigger sets featuring multiple, sometimes several cars, trucks, and even other vehicles in that scale, with terrain simulating street races of questionable legality. For such a versatile theme, it never needed to change much, but it didn't take Power Racers long to sputter trying to find new ways to stay fresh. Almost every year seemed to have something awkward about it. 2007's Crash Cars were very loosely cobbled together to explode apart as they slam into each other. It was an okay gimmick, but the cars themselves didn't have much of an identity compared to other ones. 2008 featured new spoilers, intakes, and flaps that had some nice detail to bigger sets, but on these it just took up a big chunk of the bulk and made them feel otherwise skimpy. I got a couple of them and they were okay, but I never liked them that much. 2009 they played it straight with more intricate builds, which was nice. Then in 2010 and 2011 they used those air pumps from Life on Mars? Okay. And they started to have really dumb names like Strong, Fast, Hero, and Bad. They took a break from Ferrari sets around this time, so it was just Tiny Turbos and Power Racers for a while. The last few years had the fewest sets out of any by far. 2012 was especially sad. The increasingly derivative Power Racers gave way to a few monster trucks that, in a way, took racers back to its roots, with bumpers that flung their drivers out upon impact just like the Zalaxian's tiny cars, boxes that could be folded into ramps, crazy colors and edgy names like Bone Cruncher and Crazy Demon. The builds weren't exactly great, so that's another thing they have in common. Tiny Turbos were simply called micro builds then, and they were less inspired. Wait, are those pieces from Cars? Like Pixar cars? Oh wow, what a way to go. 2013 was one of those off years that only sort of counts because it had one polybag. BMW, The Last Racer set. Whoopee. There were a couple of other cool things we got with the theme, including a bit of crossover like this. Tiny Turbo Ferrari, and 2008 was somewhat redeemed by Speed Racer sets. Yeah, anyone remember those? The price to piece ratio here was great considering each set included multiple cars, or truck, and it was a licensed theme. The builds were detailed and full of character. Pretty great stuff for a short-lived sub-theme. It picked up the slack for the normal Racers line that year. And just to make things even more complicated, in 2010, before Racers proper had even ended, before it could be phased out completely, we saw the introduction of another line, World Racers. This is considered by many, including myself, to be the spiritual successor to Racer's early years, and Race for those who remember it. Like those themes, it wasn't just the obligatory 4 yearly cars that kinda blended together. It was an assortment of vehicles that took us beyond the road to the sea, the air, and all manner of terrain. The Backyard Blasters and Extreme Daredevils. The team's colors complement each other really well, red on black versus lime green on white. Extreme's vehicles were more elegant and streamlined, the Backyard Blasters being all rough and tumble if not not rustic. I always got the impression that the Extreme Daredevils were wealthier and full of themselves, probably not even friends, with lots of big sponsors and good marketing, access to more expensive parts, a pit crew and everything, and the Backyard Blasters were a bunch of crazy Joes who just got together one day and made their rides out of whatever parts they could find, doing all the repairs themselves. Just get a load of these names. Maxtreme, Rextreme, Dextreme versus Billy Bob Bubba and Bart. I'm not sure who the heels are supposed to be here. I think both teams are kinda mean. And just look at how loaded the vehicles are. They had every launcher available at the time to blow each other up with. Is the dynamite supposed to be comical, like a cartoon, or is this a straight up death race? They even sold a weapons pack, just in case you didn't have enough. It wasn't nearly as try-hard as some of LEGO's other edgier themes, it was just enough to be kinda goofy. For a one-off with only 9 sets including polybags and ammo, World Racers had a ton of character. It was a fun and flashy, if short-lived, return to vanilla Racers' glory days. Racers as a whole may have ended, losing sight of what made it great early on until nothing was left, but that wouldn't be the end of LEGO Cars. Not that one. Enter 2015 Speed Champions. This line was revolutionary, much in the way early racer sets were, with one notable difference. These sets are based on real cars and designed to be only 6 studs wide, minus fenders and wheels sticking out. This could not have been easy for LEGO. To give you a sense of scale, their older vehicles were usually only 4 studs wide and had barely any detail, many of their later ones moving to 6 studs wide, sometimes 8, and even those were always kinda wonky. If there was any expectation for these mid-sized builds to be reasonably accurate depictions of real existing cars, they were going to need some new pieces. But not big gaudy ones like these, those weren't enough anymore. Small ones to fill in the gaps. New slopes and wedges and tiles and plates they probably couldn't have justified making without a special case like this necessitating the creation of such elements. These are like 2000 slopes all over again, but scaled down for more intricate builds than ever. And while the first few waves were pretty good, in just a few years since Speed Champions began, the more recent builds have seen some astounding improvements. I'm not a big car guy, so even I had a hard time seeing the subtle differences at first, but the shaping is so much better than in their early attempts that you can find examples of them attempting the same car a second time and the redesign looking so much better. And of course these pieces are being used in other lines to up the overall quality of LEGO's products even more. I admit, I'll never be as fond of these realistic cars as I am of the more absurd looking cartoony ones they used to make, but they still make ones like them, just in other lines like Ninjago or even City. It's funny, in the past whenever they wanted to make a giant robot or a car, they'd create an entire line focused on that. But these days, they don't really need to do that because there's a lot more overlap now. Speed Champions has its own niche to fill, and I respect the line immensely for what it's brought to the table and how it's inspired and enabled builders. Even if I haven't bought many of them, they are nice to analyze and admire for their craftsmanship sometimes, to be inspired by, to try new things. I hope the line is successful enough to continue improving and push the limit even further, but I'll always have a special spot in me for racers, at least its early days before it petered out. Thanks for joining me. Also, please do consider checking out my graphic novel series if you want to support me. Next time, we'll take a look at some underwater themes. See you at the finish line.
Welcome to the LEGO Racer Rally. Gentlemen, start your racers.
New LEGO Racers. 8 racers start, only 1 finishes.
They're racing side by side and head to head.
You can collect them all. You can crash them all.
This race isn't about winning, it's about surviving. Driver's license not included.